Before the first rat died, Oran was like any other town, gray, functional, and half asleep. People went about their lives without noticing the slow crawl of time. The streets echoed with business deals and routine greetings. Sundays were dull, conversations repetitive, and no one really believed anything extraordinary could ever happen here. The sky was often empty. Even beauty felt anesthetized. Camus begins not with horror but with numbness. That's the real plague, he whispers, not death but apathy. The people of Oran didn't hate life, they just stopped paying attention to it. And then a janitor trips over a dead rat. At first it's just one. But the next morning there are more. Rats staggering out of gutters, bleeding from the mouth, twitching in death. The town tries to ignore it. The authorities order them burned. Problem solved, right? But denial is Oran's natural instinct. Just like ours. The narrator, later revealed to be Dr. Bernard Ruse, though he hides his identity at first, observes this with clinical clarity. He's a doctor used to suffering. But even he senses something unnatural. Still, like everyone else, he's slow to react. Because plague isn't supposed to happen in modern times. Not here. Not now. And so the rats keep dying. Then they disappear. Then people begin to die. One man, Michel, develops a fever. He vomits, sweats, convulses, and dies within hours. Ruse suspects something serious, but when he raises the possibility of plague, the authorities hesitate. It's a word with weight. A word that forces action. They settle for euphemisms, a strange fever, an isolated case. But Ruse knows. So does Jean Theroux, a visiting outsider who has been keeping a strange, silent journal, recording not just the events of the town but its soul. Camus doesn't give us drama yet. He gives us slowness. Dread that builds like fog. The town is sleepwalking toward disaster and no one wants to wake up. Because to accept the truth would mean accepting how fragile everything is. Our systems, our comfort, our illusions of control. By the time the town realizes what's coming, it's already here. The gates will close. The death toll will rise. And Oran, the town that once feared boredom more than death, will soon become a prison. But the plague, as we'll see, is not just disease. It's something older. Something deeper. A mirror held up to our lives. The real terror doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a pause. A moment when people exchange glances and realize they've all been pretending. When the rats die in the streets, it's easy to sweep them up. When people die, it's harder to ignore. But still they try. At first, Oran's officials refuse to utter the word plague. To name it would be to surrender to it. So they stall. They form committees. They study data. They issue calm reports about a minor outbreak, while hospitals fill and nurses faint from exhaustion. Denial becomes policy. Dr. Ruse, however, doesn't have the luxury of language games. He's in the thick of it. He sees the purple swellings, the high fevers, the rapid decline. His suspicions are confirmed by a colleague, Dr. Castel, who begins preparing a plague serum, despite resistance from Paris and the local government. Even then, hope lingers. People still crowd the cafes. They gossip and joke, call it an exaggeration. They point to medical progress, sanitation, science. They believe that this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Camus uses this to show our modern arrogance, how we mistake comfort for immunity. And then the gates close. Just like that, Oran becomes a sealed city. No one can leave. No one can enter. People are cut off from loved ones, families separated by miles now unreachable. The trains stop. The post halts. Phone calls are rationed. Time stretches and the world outside begins to feel like a dream. Inside Oran, all that remains is the town and the waiting. This is where we meet Raymond Rambert, a Parisian journalist who had come to Oran on assignment. He's not from here. He has someone he loves outside the city. At first, he refuses to accept being trapped. He argues. He begs. He tries to escape. But as time goes on, his fight turns inward. Camus plants the seeds of existential struggle. What do we owe others, especially strangers, in a crisis? And then there's Father Panelix, a Jesuit priest. He sees the plague as divine punishment. In his first sermon, he thunders that the town is being judged, that suffering is the price of sin. But as the weeks go on, even he begins to unravel. Outside, the rats are gone. The rats were only the beginning. Now it's the people who die in the streets. Camus is building something deeper than horror here. This is not just a medical disaster, it's a test of meaning. Every character is about to face their own reflection in the eyes of death. Once the town is sealed, Oran becomes less like a city, and more like a patient. Days stretch like fever dreams. People no longer live by clocks or calendars but by numbers, case counts, death tolls, serum deliveries. The fear that once whispered now roars. And yet, Camus doesn't give us chaos. Not yet. What he gives us is monotony, repetition, routine. The slow erosion of humanity. It starts small. The city's food supplies grow thin. Funerals are shortened, then banned altogether. Bodies are carted away by masked workers and dumped into mass graves, no longer identified by name but by number. Priests can no longer read last rites. Hospitals overflow. Ruse operates endlessly, sweat-soaked and sleep-starved, but he refuses to stop. The people of Oran shift into what Camus calls a collective exile. Even friendships change. Letters can't be sent. Lovers are reduced to memories. The absence of touch becomes a wound that words cannot bandage. Raymond Rambert, the journalist, tries again and again to escape. He meets smugglers, bribes guards. He's obsessed with returning to the woman he loves in Paris. But each plan fails. And slowly something inside him changes. He sees Dr. Ruse, day after day, risking everything to treat strangers. He sees volunteers, like Grand, the shy civil servant with a stammer who still finds the courage to help. Rambert begins to ask himself, what kind of love am I fighting for? This section is where Camus shows the plague's real weapon, isolation. Not just physical but existential. Everyone is alone in their own battle. Even Father Panelix begins to soften. After witnessing a child die in agony, a boy convulsing for hours in his father's arms, Panelix's second sermon is quieter, more uncertain. He no longer preaches judgment. He speaks of mystery, of faith beyond understanding. Camus lets him evolve, from thunderous certainty to trembling humility. Meanwhile, Theroux, the observer with the notebook, steps forward. He proposes a group of sanitary volunteers, people who will bury bodies, carry the sick, clean the streets. Ordinary citizens choosing to fight not because of faith or orders, but out of human decency. Theroux believes that heroism isn't grand. It's quiet, stubborn. It's choosing to do good in a world that punishes it. As the summer heat rises, the plague worsens. Camus describes it clinically: buboes bursting, blood-darkened urine, delirious patients screaming in the night. But he never glorifies the suffering. He focuses instead on endurance. The siege, it turns out, isn't just on Oran. It's on the human spirit. By autumn, Oran is no longer recognizable. The sun is a curse. The nights feel endless. The plague has tightened its grip, and hope is now a fragile rumor. But in this darkness, Camus shines his light, not on saviors or soldiers, but on ordinary people who choose to resist quietly. Dr. Bernard Ruse is the center of this resistance. He doesn't give speeches. He doesn't pray. He doesn't pretend to have answers. He just keeps working, bandaging, operating, listening, comforting over and over again. His hands are always trembling, always tired. And yet he doesn't stop. To Ruse, this isn't heroism. It's decency. This is not about being a saint, he says. It's about being a man. Camus makes him the embodiment of existential courage, doing what must be done even when there is no reward, no glory, no God promising justice. Theroux, the traveler-turned-volunteer, becomes Ruse's closest companion. In a powerful conversation, he opens up about his past. He grew up with a father who was a prosecutor, calmly sentencing men to death without hesitation. That trauma stayed with him. Now, Theroux's entire philosophy is built around one idea: to never become an executioner in any form. I have had plague inside me all my life, Theroux confesses. I am trying to become a saint without God. Camus uses him to represent the moral weight of action. Even when you're clean, you might be complicit. The world makes you choose sides, silently, constantly. Theroux chooses resistance even knowing it may kill him. Meanwhile, Grand, the meek, aging civil servant who once seemed insignificant, emerges as one of the most moving figures in the novel. He has spent years trying to write the perfect opening sentence of a novel. Just one sentence. He rewrites it obsessively, chasing some impossible ideal. But when the plague strikes, he joins the sanitary squads. He volunteers quietly, tirelessly. His novel remains unwritten, but his life becomes a quiet act of meaning. These characters never call themselves heroes. And that's Camus' point. Heroism in the plague is not about saving the world. It's about refusing to abandon it. It's about standing beside strangers even when you're afraid. It's about sweeping the streets, holding hands, and choosing to remain human in an inhuman time. But not all heroes survive. As winter approaches, the plague begins to retreat. But it doesn't leave empty-handed. It doesn't end with a miracle. There's no antidote. No great revelation. The plague simply fades. After nearly a year of death, the number of cases begins to fall. The streets grow quieter, not because they're safer but because they're exhausted. Then one day, for the first time in months, the gates of Oran reopen. The townspeople flood out. Some weep. Some cheer. Many just stare. The world outside is still there, but they are not the same people who were locked in. Yet even as joy returns, Camus refuses to let us forget what was lost. Theroux, who fought so hard to live with dignity, contracts the plague and dies painfully, just before the epidemic lifts. Dr. Roux watches over him, helpless. There's no justice in the death. No lesson. Just silence. Then Roux reveals something he kept hidden the entire time. He was the narrator. He was the one recording everything, not to dramatize, not to moralize, but to bear witness. To say, we were here. This happened. He says he wrote the chronicle, so that some memorial of the injustice and violence done to them might endure. And in doing so, Camus delivers his quiet thesis. The plague is not just a disease. It is a symbol. It represents fascism, war, and all the irrational horrors humanity faces. Camus, writing just after World War II, saw the black uniforms and crematoriums of Nazi-occupied France as a kind of modern plague, a sickness of the soul that spreads through obedience, fear, and indifference. But he also saw resistance. Not in bombs or revolts, but in people like Roux and Grand, those who choose to act, to help, to endure. He believed that in a world without clear answers, without divine justice, morality must be built by choice, again and again, even when no one is watching. The novel ends not with celebration, but with a warning. Roux walks through the city at night, reflecting. And then he says, "The plague never dies or disappears for good. It can lie dormant for years, and perhaps the day would come when, for the bane and the enlightening of men, it would rouse up its rats again and send them forth to die in a happy city." The final image is haunting. A warning that complacency is fatal. That evil never truly disappears, it only sleeps. And that the price of being human is to remember, to resist, to refuse to look away.
Thank you for watching. If this story made you feel something, not just fear, but the sorrow of being unseen, share it. Let this tale live on, not as horror, but as a reflection. Leave a comment with the part that struck you most. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, subscribe and help us bring forgotten legends back to life.